Sophia crept into the kitchen at dawn, her 7-year-old hands trembling as she clutched her hollow stomach. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet as she approached the pantry, where a thick chain and padlock mocked her desperate hunger. She pressed her face against the cold metal, inhaling the faint scent of bread that lingered beyond the barrier. Her stomach cramped violently, a sharp reminder that she hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days. Behind her, Victoria's shadow fell across the doorway like a blade. "Please, stepmom," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible in the morning silence. "I'm hungry." Victoria Lang stood 6 feet tall in her silk robe, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the doorframe as she surveyed the pathetic scene before her. At 35, she had inherited everything when Sophia's father died in a car accident 18 months ago: the sprawling Victorian mansion, the successful tech company, and most importantly, the trust fund meant to secure little Sophia's future. What she hadn't inherited was patience for the inconvenience of raising someone else's child. "What did you just say to me?" Victoria's voice cut through the morning air, sharp as broken glass. She stepped forward, her heels echoing against the marble tiles like gunshots. Sophia shrank back, her thin shoulders hunching as she pressed herself against the locked pantry door. The chain rattled softly against the wood. I was just asking if maybe I could have some bread. Just a little piece. My tummy hurts." Victoria's laugh was hollow, devoid of any warmth. "Your tummy hurts?" She mimicked Sophia's small voice with cruel precision. "Poor little princess thinks she deserves food just because she asks nicely." The slap came without warning. Victoria's palm connected with Sophia's cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the kitchen. The 7-year-old stumbled sideways, her hand flying to her reddening face, but she didn't cry. She had learned months ago that tears only made things worse. "Worthless children don't deserve food," Victoria hissed, bending down so her face was inches from Sophia's. "They earn it." "And what exactly have you earned, little rat?" Sophia's lips trembled as she struggled to find an answer. I swept the floors yesterday, and I folded the towels in the laundry room." "Swept the floors?" Victoria straightened, her eyes scanning the pristine kitchen that her professional cleaning service maintained twice weekly. "I don't see any evidence of your pathetic attempts at usefulness." "Try again." The kitchen fell silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant rumble of morning traffic beyond the mansion's gates. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits, indifferent to the cruelty unfolding below. From upstairs came a faint coughing sound, barely audible but persistent. Victoria's head snapped toward the ceiling, her eyes narrowing. Sophia's face went pale, her small hands clenching into fists at her sides. "What was that noise?" Victoria demanded. I don't know," Sophia stammered. "Maybe it's just the pipes." "The house makes sounds sometimes." Victoria studied the child's face with predatory intensity, searching for any telltale sign of deception. The coughing had stopped, leaving only the oppressive silence that seemed to press against the walls like a living thing. Marcus Webb chose that moment to saunter into the kitchen, his presence filling the space with the smell of expensive cologne and stale cigarettes. At 42, he was what polite society might call distinguished. Silver hair, designer clothes, and the kind of confident smile that had once charmed investors out of millions before his business ventures collapsed into scandal and bankruptcy. Now he lived off Victoria's generosity and shared her disdain for the inconvenience of Sophia's existence. "Good morning, ladies," Marcus drawled, heading straight for the coffee machine. "Having our usual heart-to-heart, I see." He poured himself a cup of coffee from the expensive Italian machine, adding cream and sugar with deliberate slowness while Sophia remained frozen against the pantry door, her cheek still bearing the red imprint of Victoria's hand. "The little beggar was demanding food again," Victoria said, settling into one of the leather breakfast chairs. "I was just explaining the concept of earning one's keep." Marcus chuckled, raising his cup in a mock toast. "To tough love. Nothing builds character like a little hunger." Sophia's stomach chose that moment to emit a low, desperate growl that seemed to echo through the kitchen. The sound was so pitiful, so animalistic, that even Marcus paused mid-sip. "Jesus," he muttered, setting down his cup. "When did you last feed the kid?" Victoria waved her hand dismissively. She had dinner 2 nights ago, a perfectly adequate portion. 2 nights? Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Victoria, darling, even prisoners get daily meals." "She's not a prisoner," Victoria snapped. "She's a burden." "There's a difference, and if she wants to eat like a person, she can start acting like one instead of skulking around like some feral animal." Sophia's knees trembled as she tried to remain standing. The kitchen began to spin slightly, and she pressed her palm against the wall for support. The hunger had become more than just an empty feeling. It was a constant gnawing presence that made her bones ache and her vision blur at the edges. "Please," she whispered again, the word barely escaping her cracked lips. "I promise I'll be good. I'll do whatever you want. Just a piece of bread." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the refrigerator, opened it, and pulled out a loaf of artisanal sourdough that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a year. Weak. Sophia's eyes followed the bread with desperate hunger, her mouth watering at the sight of the golden crust. "You want bread?" Victoria asked sweetly, her voice dripping with false kindness. Sophia nodded eagerly, hope flickering in her hollow eyes. Victoria held the loaf high above her head, then let it fall to the floor with a soft thud. She raised her designer heel and brought it down hard, crushing the bread into a shapeless mass against the marble tiles. "There's your bread, little rat. Bon appétit." Sophia stared at the destroyed loaf, her thin body shaking with the effort of holding back sobs. The waste of it, the deliberate, cruel waste, hit her almost as hard as the hunger itself. "Clean it up," Victoria commanded. "Every crumb. And when you're done, maybe I'll consider letting you have the moldy piece I was going to throw away yesterday." As Sophia dropped to her knees and began gathering the crushed bread with her bare hands, neither Victoria nor Marcus noticed the ancient floorboard above them creak softly, as if someone were trying to move without being heard. The morning stretched on with the mechanical precision of practiced cruelty. Victoria and Marcus ate their breakfast: fresh fruit, imported cheeses, coffee that cost more per pound than most people earned in a day, while Sophia knelt on the floor, picking up every fragment of the destroyed bread. The smell of their food was torture, each savory aroma a reminder of what she couldn't have. "I'm going to the spa later," Victoria announced, buttering a croissant with deliberate slowness. "My massage therapist says I'm carrying too much stress in my shoulders. Can't imagine why." She glanced meaningfully at Sophia, who had finished cleaning and now sat silently in the corner, her back pressed against the wall like a discarded doll. "Take the day off," Marcus suggested, reaching across the table to squeeze Victoria's manicured hand. "You deserve it. We both know how exhausting it is to manage difficult children." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, its deep bronze voice echoing through the mansion. Somewhere upstairs, that same faint coughing resumed, so soft it might have been mistaken for the settling of old wood. Sophia's head jerked up at the sound, her eyes darting toward the ceiling. She needed to get upstairs. Rose was getting worse, and she hadn't been able to bring her anything to eat since the small piece of cheese she'd smuggled up 2 days ago. May I go to my room?" Sophia asked quietly. Victoria looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through social media posts about charity galas and luxury vacations. "Your room? What for?" "I wanted to read. I found an old book in the library and I thought maybe." "You thought maybe you could hide away and feel sorry for yourself?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "No, you'll stay right here where I can see you. I don't trust you not to go poking around where you don't belong." Sophia's heart sank. Rose would be waiting, wondering why she hadn't come with the small cup of water and whatever scraps she could find. The old woman was so weak now, so thin, but she never complained. She just held Sophia's hand and told her stories about better times, when Sophia's father was young and the world was full of possibilities. "Actually," Marcus said, finishing the last of his eggs Benedict. "I need to run some errands today." "Business meetings, you understand." He winked at Victoria, "the kind that require privacy." Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife's edge. "Of course, darling. Take all the time you need." They were talking about something else. Sophia had learned to recognize the coded language they used when they didn't want her to understand. Money, probably. It was always about money with them. The trust fund that was supposed to be hers, the insurance payouts from her father's death, the pension checks that came addressed to someone who was supposed to be dead. As Victoria and Marcus continued their breakfast, making plans that didn't include her, Sophia pressed herself smaller against the wall. The hunger was making her dizzy again, but worse than that was the fear. Fear that Rose was getting sicker. Fear that she wouldn't be able to help the only person left who loved her. Fear that one morning she would creep up to the attic and find only silence. The front door's brass bell chimed unexpectedly, its clear tone cutting through the morning's oppressive atmosphere like a blade through silk. Victoria's head snapped up from her phone, her perfectly penciled eyebrows drawing together in irritation. "Are you expecting someone?" Marcus asked, setting down his coffee cup with a sharp clink against the saucer. Victoria checked her phone's calendar app. "No appointments until this afternoon. It's probably just a delivery." But the doorbell rang again, followed by 3 firm knocks that echoed through the mansion with unmistakable authority. This wasn't a delivery person or a door-to-door salesperson. This was someone who expected to be answered. "I'll get it," Marcus said, starting to rise. "No," Victoria's voice was sharp. "Let Maria handle it when she gets in." But Maria, the part-time housekeeper, wasn't due until noon. The knocking resumed, more insistent now, accompanied by a voice calling from beyond the heavy oak door. "Victoria? It's Alexander Hayes. I know you're home. I can see the cars in the driveway." Sophia felt her heart skip a beat. Alexander Hayes. She remembered him from the funeral, a tall man with kind eyes who had knelt down to her level and told her how sorry he was about her daddy. He had been her father's business partner, his closest friend, and one of the few people who had spoken to her like she was a real person instead of an inconvenience. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "What the hell does he want?" "Probably the memorial fund. Meeting," Marcus said grimly. "Didn't you say something about that last week?" "That's not until next month," Victoria hissed. But she was already standing, smoothing her robe, checking her appearance in the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator. "Keep the brat quiet." She strode toward the front door, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Marcus turned to Sophia with a warning glare. "Not a word," he growled. "Not a sound. You don't exist until he's gone. Understand?" Sophia nodded mutely, pressing herself deeper into the corner. She could hear Victoria's voice at the front door, artificially bright and welcoming. "Alexander." What a wonderful surprise. "You look well." "Victoria." Alexander's voice was polite but cool. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I was in the neighborhood and thought we might discuss the memorial fund. There are some details about Thomas's wishes that I need to clarify with you." Thomas, her father's name. Sophia hadn't heard anyone speak it aloud in months. Victoria and Marcus always referred to him as your late husband, or simply the deceased, as if his name had been buried with him. Of course. Come in, come in." Footsteps approached the kitchen, Victoria's sharp heels and Alexander's quieter, more measured pace. Sophia tried to make herself invisible, drawing her knees to her chest and bowing her head so her stringy hair fell like a curtain across her face. Alexander Hayes stepped into the kitchen, and Sophia felt a flutter of memory. He was just as she remembered, tall and lean, with silver threading through his dark hair and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a charcoal gray suit that spoke of quiet wealth, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, but it was his expression that caught her attention. There was something watchful about the way he took in the scene before him. "Marcus," Alexander nodded politely to Victoria's boyfriend, "I didn't expect to see you here so early." Marcus's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Early bird gets the worm, as they say. Coffee? Thank you, no. I won't be staying long. Alexander's gaze swept the kitchen, taking in the expensive appliances, the marble countertops, the crystal chandelier that had been Thomas's wedding gift to his first wife. His eyes paused on the chain and padlock securing the pantry door, and Sophia saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Well, Victoria said brightly, settling back into her chair, what can I help you with? I have to say, the memorial fund has been such a comfort. Knowing that Thomas's legacy will live on through charitable giving, it's exactly what he would have wanted. Alexander pulled out his phone and opened what appeared to be a voice recording app. Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. I've been reviewing Thomas's personal papers, and I found some interesting documentation about his intentions for Sophia's care. Victoria's smile flickered like a candle in the wind. Oh? Yes. It seems he was quite specific about certain arrangements. The trust fund, for instance. He wanted to ensure that Sophia would never want for anything. Food, clothing, education, medical care. He was very concerned about her well-being. Sophia lifted her head slightly, peering through her hair at the man who had been her father's friend. He was looking directly at Victoria and Marcus, but somehow she felt as if he could see her too, huddled in her corner like a discarded shadow. Well, naturally, Victoria said, her voice gaining a defensive edge. Sophia is very well cared for. She has everything a child could need. I'm sure she does. Alexander's tone was neutral, but there was something underneath it, a current of steel beneath silk. Where is she, by the way? I'd like to say hello. Oh, she's at school. Yes, school. Very dedicated student, our Sophia. Alexander glanced at his watch. At 9:30 on a Saturday morning? The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Marcus cleared his throat loudly. Special program, he said quickly. Weekend enrichment, very exclusive. I see. Alexander made a note on his phone. And which school is she attending? Thomas mentioned wanting to enroll her at Riverside Academy, but I wasn't sure if you'd followed through with his wishes. Victoria's laugh was shrill, artificial. Oh, we thought public school would be more character building. You know how spoiled private school children can become. From somewhere above them came that soft coughing again, barely audible but persistent. Alexander's head tilted slightly, like a hunting dog catching a scent. Is someone upstairs? He asked. Just the cleaning service, Victoria said quickly. They come early on Saturdays. Very thorough. But Alexander was already moving, his attention drawn by something that made Sophia's blood run cold. A sound so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. Her own stomach, growling with desperate hunger. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. Alexander's eyes swept the room again, more carefully this time, until they found her. Sophia felt exposed under his gaze, pinned like a butterfly in a display case. She saw herself as he must see her, a skeletal child in clothes that hung like rags, hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes, pressed against the wall as if she were trying to disappear entirely. Jesus Christ, Alexander breathed, his professional composure cracking. Sophia! Victoria shot to her feet so quickly her chair toppled backward. She's fine. She's perfectly fine, just a bit of a stomach bug. You know how children are. But Alexander was already moving toward Sophia, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble as he crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides. He knelt down in front of her, his eyes level with hers, and she saw something there that she had almost forgotten existed, genuine concern. Sweetheart, he said softly, his voice gentle as morning rain. When did you last eat? Sophia's eyes darted toward Victoria, who was standing frozen by her overturned chair, and Marcus, who had his phone out as if preparing to call someone. The fear in their faces told her everything she needed to know about how much trouble she was in. She whispered, her voice barely audible. I had dinner 2 days ago. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that seemed to touch every surface. Alexander's face went white, then red with fury so sudden and intense that Sophia instinctively shrank back. But he controlled himself with visible effort, his hands clenching into fists before slowly relaxing. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. 2 days ago. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, heavy with implications that made Victoria step backward until she bumped against the refrigerator. She's lying, Victoria said quickly. She had breakfast yesterday, and lunch. She's always been a picky eater, very dramatic about food. You know how children exaggerate. Alexander's gaze never left Sophia's face. Are you lying, sweetheart? Sophia looked at Victoria, at Marcus, at the chain on the pantry door, at the crumbs of bread still stuck to the bottom of Victoria's shoe. She thought about Rose upstairs, waiting for her, wondering why she hadn't come. She thought about all the promises Victoria had made about what would happen if she ever told anyone the truth. And then she looked back at Alexander's kind eyes and made a decision that would change everything. No, sir, she whispered. I'm not lying. The kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock and Victoria's sharp, panicked breathing. Alexander stood slowly, his hands trembling with barely contained rage as he took in Sophia's skeletal frame, the way her clothes hung on her like a scarecrow's rags. Victoria, he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of boardroom negotiations and high-stakes decisions. I need you to explain to me right now why this child looks like she's been starved. She hasn't been starved, Victoria's voice cracked with hysteria. She's perfectly healthy. She's always been small for her age. Haven't you, Sophia? Tell him how well I take care of you. Sophia's eyes darted between the adults, her small body trembling. The hunger was making her dizzy, but something else was happening too. A strange lightness, as if a weight she'd been carrying for months was finally beginning to lift. I'm hungry, she whispered, the words coming out like a prayer. I'm so hungry it hurts. Alexander knelt down again, his movements careful and deliberate. How long has this been going on, sweetheart? Since, Sophia's voice caught. Since after the funeral, they said I had to earn my food, but nothing I did was ever good enough. And Grandma Rose. She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could catch the words and swallow them back down. Grandma Rose? Alexander's eyebrows drew together. Sophia, your grandmother died last winter, before your father passed away. The coughing from upstairs resumed, faint but unmistakable. Alexander's head turned toward the ceiling, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. That's impossible, he said slowly. Rose Collins died of pneumonia in January. I went to her funeral. I spoke at her service. Victoria and Marcus exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Marcus took a step toward the kitchen door, as if preparing to block an exit, while Victoria's face cycled through a range of expressions: fear, anger, and finally, desperate calculation. She did die, Victoria said quickly. Sophia sometimes gets confused. Children process grief differently than adults. She's been having episodes, talking to imaginary friends, making up stories. The doctor said it was normal after such trauma, but Alexander was no longer listening to Victoria. His attention was fixed on the ceiling, where the soft coughing had grown more persistent. And underneath it, barely audible, came another sound, a weak voice calling a name. Sophia. Sophia, dear. The blood drained from Alexander's face. He looked at Sophia, then at Victoria, then back at the child who was now crying silent tears that tracked down her hollow cheeks. She's alive, he breathed. Rose is alive. That's impossible, Marcus interjected, his voice too loud in the sudden tension. You said yourself you went to the funeral. You saw the body. I saw a body, Alexander corrected, his mind racing through possibilities that made his stomach clench with horror. In a closed casket, Victoria said Rose had been damaged in a fall. Victoria's laugh was high and brittle. "You're being ridiculous. Both of you. Sophia, stop this nonsense right now. Tell Mr. Hayes that Grandma Rose is gone." But Sophia had found her courage, fragile as it was. She looked up at Alexander with eyes that held depths of suffering no child should know. "She's in the attic," she whispered. "She's very sick, and I've been trying to take care of her, but I don't have any food to give her. She hasn't eaten in 3 days, and I think she's dying for real this time." The kitchen exploded into motion. Marcus lunged toward Sophia, but Alexander was faster, scooping the child up in his arms and stepping between her and Victoria's boyfriend. "Don't you dare touch her," Alexander growled. And for a moment the mild-mannered businessman was gone, replaced by something primal and dangerous. Victoria was screaming now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like ancient wallpaper. "She's delusional. She's sick. You can't believe the ravings of a disturbed child." But Alexander was already moving toward the staircase, Sophia clinging to his shoulders like a lifeline. Each step he climbed felt like walking through molasses, the implications of what he was about to discover weighing on him like lead. The mansion's upper floor was a maze of hallways and closed doors, but Sophia guided him with whispered directions toward a narrow staircase he hadn't noticed before, the servants' stairs that led to the converted attic space. "She's up there," Sophia breathed against his ear, "but be quiet. Sometimes they come to check if they hear too much noise." Alexander climbed the creaking stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. At the top, a single door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap came the smell of sickness and unwashed bedding. He pushed the door open and stepped into hell. Rose Collins lay on a narrow cot in the far corner of the attic, so thin and wasted that she looked like a ghost of herself. Her white hair, once carefully permed and styled, hung in limp tangles around a face that was all sharp angles and bruised-looking shadows. Her breathing was labored, each exhale a struggle that seemed to shake her entire fragile frame. But her eyes were still sharp, still aware, and they fixed on Alexander with a mixture of recognition and desperate hope. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves, "is that really you?" Alexander set Sophia down gently and crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside the cot. Up close, Rose's condition was even worse than he'd thought. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and showed signs of neglect that made his vision blur with rage. "Oh, Rose," he breathed, taking her paper-thin hand in his. "What have they done to you?" Rose's grip was weak but determined. "They told everyone I was dead," she whispered. "Collected the death benefits, the insurance money. They keep me here like an animal. If it weren't for Sophia." Alexander turned to look at the little girl who had pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear. "She's been taking care of you." Rose nodded, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "She brings me whatever she can find. Sometimes just a sip of water, or a crust of bread. She sings to me when I can't sleep, tells me stories." Her voice broke. "She saved my life, Alexander. Over and over again, she saved my life." Alexander's hands shook as he took in the scene, the makeshift living conditions, the bucket in the corner that served as Rose's toilet, the stack of moldy blankets that was her only bed. This wasn't neglect. This was torture. "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice steady despite the fury coursing through his veins. "Both of you. Right now." But footsteps on the stairs announced Victoria's arrival, followed by Marcus and another voice Alexander didn't recognize. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with exertion and panic, flanked by Marcus and a thin man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Hayes," the stranger said smoothly, "I'm Gerald Pike, the family's attorney. I'm afraid you're trespassing on private property." Alexander stood slowly, placing himself between the newcomers and the 2 victims huddled behind him. "I'm afraid you're wrong, Mr. Pike. I'm documenting evidence of elder abuse, child endangerment, and insurance fraud." Pike's smile was reptilian. "Those are very serious accusations." Do you have any proof? Alexander pulled out his phone, which had been recording since he'd entered the attic. I have Rose Collins's testimony that she was declared dead while very much alive, and that insurance benefits were collected under false pretenses. I have a malnourished child who's been denied food as punishment, and I have a living victim of what appears to be kidnapping and false imprisonment. Victoria stepped forward, her face twisted with desperate fury. Rose is mentally incompetent. She doesn't know what she's saying, and Sophia is disturbed. She makes up elaborate fantasies to get attention. Then you won't mind if I call 911, Alexander said, his thumb hovering over his phone's emergency dial. Let the authorities sort it out. Wait, Marcus said quickly. Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. Alexander, you're a reasonable man. Surely you understand that family matters are complex. But Alexander was already dialing, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face as he spoke to the emergency operator. I need police and paramedics at 1247 Elm Street immediately. I have an elderly woman who's been held prisoner and a child victim of severe neglect. Both need immediate medical attention. Victoria screamed and lunged toward him, her manicured nails reaching for his phone, but Alexander stepped aside and she crashed into the wall instead. Pike grabbed Marcus's arm, whispering urgently in his ear, while Rose's labored breathing filled the sudden silence. Sophia, Alexander said gently, not taking his eyes off the adults who were clearly calculating their next move. Can you come here, sweetheart? The little girl crept toward him, her movements careful and frightened. When she was close enough, Alexander scooped her up again, holding her against his chest like a shield. Everything's going to be okay now, he murmured into her hair. Help is coming. But even as he said it, Alexander knew the real battle was just beginning. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air like a salvation song. Alexander held Sophia tightly as they waited in the attic, Rose's breathing providing a fragile counterpoint to the approaching chaos below. Victoria and Marcus had retreated downstairs, their urgent whispers carrying up through the floorboards, along with the sound of papers being shuffled and shredded. Within minutes, the attic was full of people. Paramedic Sarah Chen took one look at Rose and immediately called for additional medical support, while her partner began setting up an IV to address the severe dehydration. Police officer Maria Santos documented the scene with methodical precision, photographing the squalid conditions and taking detailed notes. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Sarah asked gently as she checked Rose's vital signs. "Rose. Rose Collins," came the whispered reply. "They said I was dead. They had a funeral and everything." Officer Santos looked up sharply from her notepad. "Ma'am, are you saying you attended your own funeral?" Rose managed a weak laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "No, dear. I was locked up here while they buried someone else and collected my death benefits. The implications hit everyone in the room like a physical blow." Alexander pulled out his phone and showed Santos the recording he'd made, his hands steady despite the rage still coursing through his system. "This is all documented," he said quietly, "including their confession about collecting insurance money while keeping her imprisoned." Downstairs, Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek as more officers arrived with a search warrant. The sounds of drawers being opened and papers rustling drifted up through the floorboards, followed by Marcus's angry cursing and the distinctive click of handcuffs. Dr. Rebecca Torres arrived with the second ambulance crew, her practiced eye immediately assessing both victims. She knelt beside Sophia, who still clung to Alexander's shirt like a lifeline. "Hello, sweetheart, doctor," Torres said softly. "I'm a doctor, and I'd like to help you feel better. Is that okay?" Sophia nodded mutely, her hollow eyes tracking every movement as the doctor gently examined her. The assessment was quick but thorough. Dangerously underweight, signs of prolonged malnutrition, but no broken bones or other physical injuries. "She needs to be hospitalized, doctor," Torres told Alexander quietly. "Her blood sugar is critically low, and we need to address the malnutrition carefully. Refeeding syndrome is a real concern when someone's been starved this long. Alexander's jaw tightened. How long? Based on her condition? Months, maybe since shortly after her father died. Dr. Torres's professional composure cracked slightly. She's been surviving on maybe 300 calories a day. For a growing child, it's attempted murder. Social worker Janet Mills appeared in the doorway, her kind face immediately taking in the scene. She'd worked hundreds of abuse cases, but even she seemed shaken by what she was witnessing. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, "I understand you're the one who discovered this situation?" Alexander nodded, still holding Sophia. "I was Thomas Collins's business partner." Sophia's father. "I came to discuss memorial fund business and found—" He gestured helplessly at the squalid attic. "I'll need to conduct interviews with both victims once they're medically stable," Janet said, "but I want you to know, based on what I'm seeing here, this is going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." As the paramedics prepared to transport Rose to the hospital, she grabbed Alexander's hand with surprising strength. "The money," she whispered urgently. "They've been stealing everything. Sophia's trust fund, my pension, the life insurance. There are papers hidden under my mattress." Officer Santos immediately began searching, pulling out a manila envelope stuffed with documents, bank statements, forged death certificates, insurance claim forms, and most damning of all, a detailed list in Victoria's handwriting documenting every penny they'd stolen. "This is extensive financial fraud," Santos muttered, photographing each document. "We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars." 2 hours later, Alexander found himself in the pediatric ward of St. Mary's Hospital, watching IV fluids slowly drip into Sophia's arm. She'd been so dehydrated that it had taken the nurses 3 attempts to find a vein, and even now her vital signs were being monitored constantly. "The good news, Doctor," Torres explained, "is that there doesn't appear to be any permanent organ damage. Children are remarkably resilient. With proper nutrition and care, she should make a full physical recovery." "And the psychological trauma?" Alexander asked. Dr. Torres's expression grew more serious. "That will take longer. PTSD is almost guaranteed, probably trust issues, anxiety around food. She's going to need extensive therapy." Alexander nodded, his hand resting gently on Sophia's small shoulder. She'd been asleep for an hour, the first peaceful rest she'd probably had in months. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A teenage girl with shoulder-length brown hair peeked into the room, her expression uncertain. "Dad," she said quietly. "The nurse said I could come in." Emma Hayes, Alexander's 16-year-old daughter, stepped into the room carrying a small gift bag. She'd inherited her father's thoughtful nature but possessed the protective instincts that came from losing her own mother to cancer 3 years earlier. "How is she?" Emma asked, looking at Sophia's sleeping form. "Alive," Alexander said simply, "which is more than we could have hoped for a few hours ago." Emma set the gift bag on the bedside table and pulled up a chair. "I brought some books. Mom always said books were the best medicine when you felt lost." Alexander felt his throat tighten. Emma rarely mentioned her mother directly, but when she did, it was always with this quiet wisdom that made her seem older than her years. "The police said the stepmother and her boyfriend have been stealing from her," Emma continued. "Everything. The trust fund your father and I set up, the insurance money, even Rose's pension checks." Alexander's voice hardened. "They've been living like royalty while keeping a child and an elderly woman prisoner in their own home." Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying Sophia's face. "She looks like she's my age, but she's so small." 7, Alexander said. "She's only 7, Em." The number hung in the air between them like a challenge. Emma had been 7 when her parents divorced, 7 when she'd first shown signs of the anxiety that still plagued her sometimes. But she'd never been hungry, never been afraid that the adults who were supposed to protect her would hurt her instead. "What happens to her now?" Emma asked. Foster care, probably. The state will take custody while they sort out the legal mess. There are relatives somewhere. Thomas mentioned a sister in Oregon, I think, but it could take months to locate them and verify they're suitable guardians. Emma frowned. Foster care? With strangers? Alexander nodded grimly. The system is overloaded, Em. Good families are rare, and Sophia's going to need specialized care. The trauma she's experienced, it changes a child. She's going to have trust issues, probably nightmares, anxiety around food. So help her. The words were so simple, so direct, that Alexander actually blinked in surprise. What? Help her, Emma repeated, her voice gaining strength. You have the resources. You cared enough about her father to set up that memorial fund, and she's already been through enough. Why put her through the uncertainty of the foster system, too? Alexander stared at his daughter, seeing echoes of her mother in the stubborn set of her jaw. Emma, it's not that simple. Temporary guardianship requires extensive background checks, home studies, legal proceedings. So start them. And what about us? Our life. You're in your junior year, you have college applications coming up, your therapy appointments. Emma's expression softened. Dad, do you remember what you told me after Mom died? When I was having those panic attacks and couldn't sleep, Alexander did remember. Emma had been 13, lost in her own grief, convinced that everyone she loved would eventually leave her. He'd held her while she cried and whispered the same words over and over, "We take care of each other." That's what families do. You said families take care of each other, Emma continued. Well, maybe family isn't just about blood. Maybe it's about choosing to show up when someone needs you. Before Alexander could respond, Sophia stirred in the hospital bed. Her eyes fluttered open, immediately darting around the unfamiliar room with the panicked awareness of someone who'd learned to constantly assess for danger. Hey, sweetheart, Alexander said softly, leaning forward so she could see his face. You're safe. You're in the hospital, and the doctors are helping you feel better. Sophia's gaze found Emma, and her small body tensed. Who's she? This is my daughter, Emma, Alexander explained. She wanted to meet you. Emma smiled, but kept her distance, instinctively understanding that sudden movements might frighten the girl. Hi, Sophia. I brought you some books, if you like to read. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Books? For me? For you, Emma confirmed. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I brought a few different kinds. There's one about a girl who talks to animals, and one about magic trees, and... She reached into the gift bag and pulled out a worn paperback. This was my favorite when I was your age. It's about a secret garden. Sophia stared at the offered book as if it were made of gold. I can keep it? Of course you can keep it, Emma said gently. It's yours. For the first time since Alexander had found her, Sophia smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it transformed her entire face from a mask of suffering into something that looked almost like hope. Thank you, Sophia whispered, accepting the book with trembling hands. Dr. Torres appeared in the doorway, followed by Janet Mills and a police detective Alexander didn't recognize. The social worker's expression was grim. Mr. Hayes, could we speak privately for a moment? Alexander glanced at Emma, who immediately understood. I'll stay with Sophia, she said, settling more comfortably in her chair. We can look at the books together. In the hallway, Doctor. Torres delivered the news Alexander had been dreading. Rose Collins passed away 20 minutes ago. Her body just couldn't recover from the prolonged neglect. I'm sorry. Alexander felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Rose had been Thomas's mother-in-law, the woman who'd helped raise Sophia after her mother died in childbirth. She'd been kind, stubborn, and completely devoted to her granddaughter. And now she was gone, another victim of Victoria and Marcus's greed. Does Sophia know? He asked. Janet Mills shook her head. We wanted to discuss the best way to tell her. She's been through so much trauma already. I'll tell her, Alexander said quietly. Rose was the only family she had left. She deserves to hear it from someone who cares about her. Detective Williams, a weathered man with kind eyes, stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, I need to let you know that we've arrested Victoria Lang and Marcus Webb on charges of elder abuse, child endangerment, financial fraud, and insurance fraud. The district attorney is also considering charges of negligent homicide in Rose Collins's death. Alexander nodded, feeling hollow. Good. They need to pay for what they've done. There's something else, Detective Williams continued. We found evidence that Thomas Collins's death may not have been an accident. There are irregularities in the vehicle maintenance records, and Marcus Webb had been the last person to service the brakes. The hallway seemed to spin around Alexander. You're saying they killed Thomas too? We're saying there are enough questions to warrant a full investigation, Williams replied carefully. The insurance payout was substantial, over $2 million. That's a significant motive. Alexander leaned against the wall, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Thomas hadn't just died in a tragic accident. He'd been murdered by the woman he'd married to give Sophia a mother, and the man he'd trusted to help manage his business affairs. How much more can one child endure? He whispered. Janet Mills placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The resilience of children never fails to amaze me, Mr. Hayes. Sophia has survived things that would break most adults. With the right support system, she can recover from this. What kind of support system? Alexander asked. Ideally, a stable home environment with people who understand trauma, consistent therapy, probably for years, and most importantly, adults who are committed to her healing, not just her physical needs. Alexander thought of Emma's words. Maybe family isn't just about blood. Maybe it's about choosing to show up when someone needs you. What would I need to do to become her temporary guardian? He asked. Detective Williams raised an eyebrow. That's a significant commitment, Mr. Sarah Hayes. The legal process alone could take months. I have the resources to navigate the legal process, Alexander replied. And I have something more important. I have a daughter who's already decided that Sophia needs our help. Janet Mills smiled for the first time since Alexander had met her. In that case, Mr. Hayes, let's talk. 3 days later. The emergency custody hearing took place in family court, a sterile room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and old coffee. Judge Patricia Moore, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair and no patience for bureaucratic delays, reviewed the case file with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty. Alexander sat at the petitioner's table with his attorney, Sarah Chen, no relation to the paramedic, just one of those coincidences that made the world seem smaller than it was. Across the room, Victoria and Marcus sat in orange jumpsuits, flanked by their court-appointed lawyers and looking nothing like the sophisticated couple who'd been living off stolen money. Sophia sat in the witness section with Janet Mills, wearing a new dress that Emma had picked out and holding the book about the secret garden like a talisman. She'd gained 2 pounds since being hospitalized, and the color was slowly returning to her cheeks, but she still looked fragile as spun glass. Your Honor, Sarah Chen began, my client is petitioning for temporary guardianship of Sophia Collins, age 7, whose primary caregivers have been charged with multiple felonies, including child endangerment and elder abuse resulting in death. Judge Moore looked up from the file. And what is your relationship to the child, Mr. Hayes? Alexander stood. I was her father's business partner and closest friend, Your Honor. Thomas Collins named me as backup executor of his will and specifically requested that I watch over Sophia's welfare if anything happened to him. And yet you allowed her to remain with the stepmother for 18 months? The question was sharp, accusatory, and Alexander felt it like a blade between his ribs. Your Honor, I had no reason to suspect abuse or neglect. Victoria Lang presented herself as a devoted mother, and I respected what I believed were her wishes for privacy during the grieving process. If I had known. But you didn't know, Judge Moore interrupted, which raises the question of whether you're qualified to notice and address a child's needs going forward. Alexander's attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, my client discovered the abuse situation and immediately took action to remove the child from danger. He documented evidence, called emergency services, and ensured both victims received immediate medical attention. His response was exemplary. And what about your own family situation, Mr. Hayes? Judge Moore asked. You're a widower raising a teenage daughter. Adding a traumatized 7-year-old to that dynamic is a significant undertaking. Alexander glanced back at Emma, who gave him an encouraging nod from the gallery. Your Honor, I won't pretend this will be easy, but I have the resources to provide Sophia with everything she needs: medical care, therapy, education, and most importantly, stability. My daughter Emma is fully supportive of this decision. Victoria's lawyer, a thin man with nervous energy, stood up. Your Honor, my client disputes the allegations of abuse and neglect. The child has a history of behavioral problems and attention-seeking behavior. Counselor, Judge Moore's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip crack. Are you seriously going to argue that a child who weighed 38 pounds at age 7 was not being abused? The lawyer sat down quickly. Marcus's attorney didn't even attempt to speak. Judge Moore turned to Janet Mills. What is the Department of Children and Families' recommendation? Janet stood, consulting her notes. Your Honor, DCF supports Mr. Hayes' petition for temporary guardianship. Our background investigation found no red flags, and his resources and commitment to the child's well-being are evident. We believe this placement is in Sophia's best interests. And the child's wishes? Judge Moore looked directly at Sophia, who seemed to shrink under the attention of the entire courtroom. Sophia, do you understand what we're talking about here today? Sophia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. Yes, ma'am. You're deciding where I'm going to live. And where would you like to live? Sophia looked at Alexander, then at Emma, then back at the judge. With Mr. Alexander and Emma, they're kind to me and... She took a shuddering breath. And they don't lock the food away. The simple statement hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment, her professional composure cracking. Judge Moore leaned forward slightly. Sophia, are you sure that's what you want? Mr. Hayes and Emma would become your family. That's a big change. Sophia clutched her book tighter. Grandma Rose told me that sometimes God sends angels when you need them most. She said I should be brave enough to recognize them when they come. She looked at Alexander with eyes that seemed far too old for her 7-year-old face. I think they're my angels. Judge Moore was quiet for a long moment, her stern expression softening almost imperceptibly. The court grants temporary guardianship to Alexander Hayes, with the understanding that this arrangement will be reviewed in 6 months. Mr. Hayes, you are now legally responsible for Sophia Collins's welfare, education, and medical care. Alexander felt his knees go weak with relief. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, Judge Moore said dryly. You've just taken on one of the most challenging jobs in the world, healing a broken child. I suggest you take it seriously. As the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration and paperwork, Sophia walked over to Alexander with careful steps. She looked up at him with those ancient eyes and whispered the words that would stay with him forever. Does this mean I can have dinner tonight? And tomorrow night? And every night? Alexander knelt down to her level, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Every night, sweetheart. For as long as you want. For the second time since he'd found her, Sophia smiled. 6 months later. The kitchen of Alexander's house was filled with the warm scent of homemade chicken soup and fresh bread. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging from a chair that had been adjusted to accommodate her still small frame. She was reading aloud from a chapter book while Emma helped her sound out the more difficult words. The garden was no longer a secret, Sophia read carefully, because everyone who loved it helped it grow. Emma smiled, checking the soup one more time before ladling it into bowls. That's beautiful reading, Sophia. You've gotten so much better. Sophia beamed with pride. In 6 months, she'd gained 15 pounds, grown 2 inches, and most importantly, learned to speak without fear. Her hair was shiny and healthy now, pulled back with a bright blue ribbon that Emma had taught her to tie herself. Alexander walked in from his home office, loosening his tie after a long day of video conferences. The sight that greeted him still took his breath away. His 2 daughters, because that's what they were now, working together to prepare a family meal. "How was school today?" he asked, kissing the top of Sophia's head before settling into his usual chair. "Mrs. Patterson said I'm reading at grade level now," Sophia announced proudly. "And I made a friend. Her name is Lucy, and she likes horses too." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Emma brought the soup to the table, followed by a basket of warm bread that filled the kitchen with the scent of rosemary and butter. They held hands for their sortitistweint customary moment of gratitude, a tradition that had started when Sophia asked if they could thank her daddy and Grandma Rose for watching over them. "For family," Alexander said simply. "For food," Sophia added, still marveling at the abundance. "For second chances," Emma concluded. As they ate, Sophia chattered about her day. The art project she was working on, the book report she had due next week, the field trip to the zoo that was coming up. Normal 7-year-old concerns that had replaced the desperate silence of survival. "Can I have seconds, please?" Sophia asked, holding up her empty bowl with the confidence that had taken months to develop. "Of course you can," Alexander replied, refilling her bowl with the automatic ease of routine. "As much as you want." Later, after homework was finished and bedtime stories were read, Alexander found a crayon drawing on his desk. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a house with smoke curling from the chimney and flowers blooming in the yard. At the bottom, in Sophia's careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family. We take care of each other." Alexander smiled, thinking of Emma's words from that first day in the hospital. Maybe family isn't just about blood. Maybe it's about choosing to show up when someone needs you. As he turned off the lights and checked the doors, a nightly ritual that helped Sophia sleep peacefully, he paused at her bedroom door. She was curled up under the handmade quilt Emma had given her, the book about the secret garden tucked under her pillow like a talisman against bad dreams. "Good night, Angel," he whispered, the same words he'd said to Emma every night since her mother died. "Good night, Daddy," Sophia murmured back, the word coming naturally now, without hesitation or fear. Alexander smiled, remembering Rose's words about angels appearing when you needed them most. Perhaps they all had been angels for each other. Broken people choosing to heal together, creating a family out of love and second chances, and the simple daily choice to show up. In the morning, there would be breakfast around the kitchen table, the sound of laughter mixing with the clink of spoons against bowls, and the blessed ordinariness of a child who no longer had to whisper when she was hungry. But tonight, there was just the peaceful breathing of his daughters sleeping safely under his roof, and the quiet satisfaction of promises kept. Epilogue. 2 years later. The courtroom was packed for Victoria Lang's sentencing hearing. She and Marcus Webb had been convicted on all counts: child endangerment, elder abuse, financial fraud, insurance fraud, and in Marcus's case, second-degree murder for the death of Thomas Collins. The evidence had been overwhelming. The tampered brake lines, the forged death certificate, the stolen trust fund money, and most damning of all, the recorded confession Alexander had captured that first morning in the attic. Sophia, now 9 years old and radiating health and confidence, sat between Alexander and Emma in the gallery. She'd insisted on being present for the sentencing, despite her therapist's concerns. "I need to see that it's really over," she'd told Dr. Jennifer Walsh during their weekly session. "I need to know that what they did was wrong, and that people who hurt children get punished for it." Judge Patricia Moore, The same judge who had granted Alexander temporary guardianship 2 years earlier looked older and more tired as she reviewed the pre-sentencing reports. The Hayes family's journey had been documented extensively. Sophia's remarkable recovery, the successful guardianship period, and finally, the formal adoption that had made her officially and permanently part of their family. Victoria Lang, Judge Moore began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have been convicted of crimes that shock the conscience of this court. You systematically abused a child in your care, imprisoned an elderly woman, stole funds meant to provide for a child's welfare, and participated in a conspiracy that resulted in the murder of that child's father. Victoria sat stone-faced in her orange jumpsuit, no trace of the sophisticated woman who had once manipulated sympathy at charity functions. The evidence presented at trial paints a picture of calculated cruelty that went far beyond simple neglect. You used hunger as a weapon against a 7-year-old child. You imprisoned an elderly woman and collected death benefits while she wasted away in an attic. You destroyed a family for money. Judge Moore paused, her gaze finding Sophia in the gallery. However, this court has also witnessed something extraordinary. We have seen a child's remarkable resilience, and we have seen what happens when good people choose to act with courage and compassion. Sophia Collins. Hayes is not just a survivor. She is a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Alexander felt Sophia squeeze his hand, her small fingers intertwined with his. Victoria Lang, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. Marcus Webb, you are sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder of Thomas Collins. The gavel fell with finality, and Sophia let out a long breath that seemed to carry away the last of her fear. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around the Hayes family, but Alexander kept his statement brief. Justice has been served today, he said simply. Our focus now is on the future, continuing to heal, continuing to grow as a family, and continuing to honor the memory of Thomas Collins and Rose Collins by living lives full of love and purpose. As they walked toward their car, Sophia tugged on Emma's sleeve. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? She asked, her eyes bright with the simple joy of a child who could ask for what she wanted without fear. Emma grinned. I think that's an excellent idea. What kind do you want? All of them, Sophia laughed, spinning in a circle on the courthouse steps. I want all the flavors. Alexander and Emma laughed too, understanding that this wasn't about ice cream at all. It was about abundance after scarcity, about choice after powerlessness, about the beautiful, everyday miracle of a child who no longer had to whisper when she was hungry. That evening, Alexander found another drawing on his desk. This one showed a family of 3 sitting around a kitchen table overflowing with food. At the bottom, in Sophia's neat 9-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for hearing me whisper." But she'd crossed out whisper and written speak instead. Because Sophia Collins Hayes no longer whispered. She spoke with the clear, confident voice of a child who knew she was loved, protected, and valued. She spoke with the strength that came from surviving the unthinkable and finding her way to safety. She spoke with the voice of someone who had learned that sometimes, when you're brave enough to ask for help, angels do appear to carry you home. The story closes with the warm light of justice served and a family forged through love rather than blood. Victoria and Marcus paid the ultimate price for their cruelty, while Sophia found not just survival, but true healing in the arms of people who chose to love her. This reminds us that the wicked will always face consequences, the good will be rewarded, and that sometimes the greatest families are built not from genetics, but from the simple decision to show up when someone needs you most. What moment in this journey touched your heart the deepest? Was it Sophia's whispered plea for food, Alexander's choice to intervene, Or perhaps Emma's wisdom about family being more than blood? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone's courage to speak up changed a life? Your voice matters in breaking the silence around those who suffer. If this story moved you, please leave a comment, share the video with your loved ones, and subscribe so you won't miss the next